Today is the 20th of October, 2022. It's the 1100th hour. So, I was thinking this morning, of the current situation that we find ourselves in on a global scale. And, and I'm just running these things through my mind as I'm going about my daily chores of feeding all my creatures before I leave for work. And I had this thought that why am I a conspiracy theorist? Why do I believe in conspiracies? Maybe that's a better way to describe it. Why do I believe? Why? Well, it's relatively simple, and I might have addressed this in a previous video before, but maybe I need to kind of go into greater detail. So I was actually pondering this for quite a while this morning as I was having coffee and all these other things that I do before I go. And I really think it began when I was a child. And let me explain it this way. I was raised by a World War II vet, okay? And we spent a lot of time together, particularly in my formative years when I was young. And he had a captive audience with me twice a day for about an hour each day when he brought me to school and when he picked me up from school. So we're in a vehicle, a 1964 Rambler to be exact, and with no radio. So we talked. So we learned how to communicate. That's probably where I learned how to communicate so well. And it was my uncle, and he was a brilliant. I don't know if I would say he was a brilliant man. He was a man of his time, but he wasn't formally college educated. But boy, he was on ball with everything. He knew a lot of things about a lot of stuff, and he studied. Well into his 80s, he was still reading books on history and would do mathematic problems to keep his mind sharp. He was not a typical senior per se. And I remember when I was old enough to start understanding World War II, I remember asking him, well, where were you when Pearl Harbor happened? And I remember him telling me exactly what he was doing and where he was and the address he lived at. And I said, well, what did you think was going to happen? And, he went on to this, and we talked a lot about that. And I have most of his war papers. I got his draft letter. I have his discharge papers at home. I have everything that he had from the service, from military service. I don't know what's going to happen to him once I'm dead, but I'm holding it, thinking it's precious to me. It's part of history, right? So I remember him telling me that he believed. I shouldn't say he believed, but he said, and I remember him saying that, some people thought that Franklin Delano Roosevelt allowed Pearl Harbor to happen on purpose because of the anti-war sentiment that was in the United States at the time. And he was alive in that time. He remembers nobody wanted to go to war in Europe. They didn't care. No one said, the heck with it, we're not getting involved, because of the bullshit that came out of World War I. The war to end all wars. And we came back very disillusioned from all of that as a people and as a country, and said, we don't want anything to do with Europe anymore. They're nothing but trouble, basically. So no one wanted to get involved then. So he said that there were a lot of people that think FDR let Pearl Harbor happen because he knew it would change the public sentiment about war. Is there some evidence for this? Well, yeah, there is a little bit of evidence for this, because they knew that these Japanese planes were coming. And truth be told, we kind of provoked Japan into that because we had an oil sanction against them. That we were not letting them get any more oil for their war effort that they were waging in the Far East. So the Japanese were kind of pushed into a corner because of us. So, and that always sat with me. And I always remember that conversation. And I was little. I was grade school age with that conversation, just so you know. So it wasn't older. And then I can remember him saying that, I realized that the reason he was alive still was because Truman dropped the bombs, the atomic bombs in Japan. Because even though he was a medic, they were training him for hand-to-hand combat after the war in Europe ended. So he knew he was going to be heading to the Asian front. Eastern front, I should say. And that would have been, historically speaking, that would have been devastating for any of the Allies. And it would have been basically Americans, because the Russians didn't plan on getting involved. And I don't know if the British or the French were going to get themselves involved with that much either, but it was going to be us for sure. So, and then I started to think, man, I might not be the person I am today if he wasn't around. And I might I might not even be alive if it wasn't for him. It's the truth. So in a way, that bomb kind of saved my life in a way for future generations. It's really important if you think about it. But so maybe that's where my journey started. And so the other part of my journey probably began in 2000, when I unexpectedly seen something that defies logic, defies reason, defies science, and isn't supposed to exist. And the first thing that happens in your mind when you come to the realization that this is real, you realize, well, if this is real, then the government has to know about it, right? The government has to know. And then you realize if the government knows and they're not telling the populace and everybody thinks it's a joke and it's a myth and it's not real, well, there's a conspiracy there, is it not? And there are some people who are watching this who know exactly what I'm talking about. And then it gets even crazier when you start to pursue that so-called myth because you know it's real, and you start to pursue it, and you get your feet wet, so to speak, and your feet boots on the ground, as they say, and you start to have more experiences, and you start to see more things that aren't supposed to exist or supposed to be true. And then who do you talk to about this? Because all of a sudden now you realize that this is real. There's a whole situation going on that shouldn't be real. Yeah. So you become a conspiracy theorist when you realize that the government hides things from us. And then you start to question, what else are they hiding? What else do they not want you to know? So in this age that we live in now, with the internet, social media, and this hyper sensationalism about everything that you could possibly imagine, every little bit of information at your fingertips, you have to ask yourself, wow, what else is going on? So I start to, as I look at information and try to squeeze it into this worldview that has formed over the years for myself, not just on a spiritual situation, but worldly, because it's intertwined. And a lot of people don't realize that the physical realm is intertwined with the spiritual realm. And if you want to know what's going to happen, and there's things that in the biblical record that really points to a really bleak time in human history at the moment, which I don't think we're going to go through personally. I think there's going to be something miraculous in a very, 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 very near future come about. But that doesn't mean it's trying to push its way through. So, am I a conspiracy theorist? Oh, absolutely. And based on what I see and what I have experienced. And sadly, most people have not experienced things that defy reason, logic, and so-called science. Because most people go around plotting their day in and day out, worried about work and their kids and so on. They don't have time to think of other things, even though they probably should be pondering these things. So when here is where it all comes together. It all comes together in the political realm. Why does it come together in the political realm? Because the political realm is where spiritual entities fight for the control of men. And when I'm talking about men, I'm talking about mankind, humankind. The political arena is where spiritual entities battle for the control of humanity. I want you to really think about this, because that's very, very important. That's why politics are so important. Because, truth be told, the devil you'll never meet the devil. He's got too many other things that he has to deal with. He's not omnipotent. He's not omnipotent. He doesn't have time to mess around with some peon like you or I, right? Unless you become a really big threat in some specific way. So who's he going to focus on? Well, he's going to focus on the political system, because that's how he has the maximum influence. How is he going to spend his time? He's going to spend his time influencing a handful of people that control the political sphere in this world. That's where he's going to be focusing his time. So we're living in a time where you see evil people gaining ground that are behind the scenes, in the shadows, manipulating and controlling situations, trying to push us into a one world governmental system. It ain't hard to see it, folks. You got to pay attention to what is happening around the world. You got to look. If you want to have a better idea what's happening around the world, I recommend something called Sky News. It's from Australia, where they're covering a lot of the stuff that goes on in Europe and in the UK, stuff that our media in this country does not cover. And it's important to see what is happening there. We as Americans tend to, in Canada, pay attention to what happens in Canada. Because what they're trying to do is they're trying to force. Look, all I got to tell you is just pay attention. Here's a real simple way to pay attention to this. Pay attention to how much they're trying to push you and your family into eating insects. That's just a real good, that will show you that there is an agenda behind the scenes trying to push its way through. Look and see what they're trying to do to farmers, particularly those who raise cattle. Look what they're trying to do to them in other parts of the world, primarily in Europe, because it's easier to push this shit in Europe than it is in the United States. And what you see happening in our country now in the United States and Canada is they're trying to push us to a system like the Europeans have. They're trying to push us into that. And if you think free speech is quelled now here in the United States, you should see what they do to people in Europe. You go to jail for social media posts. So I just want people to look at a bigger picture and to reevaluate what you think to be reality and what isn't. Because, look, if you are not thinking even a little bit along a conspiratorial mind, you aren't really based in reality. You really aren't. What you're based in, what your mind is in, is you are stuck in a narrative that they have been pushing on humanity for a very, very long time, with periods of time where humanity broke out of that and then slowly sunk back into that manipulation again. You have to start thinking differently. And number one, you should never be trusting the government. You should always be looking at them like this, with one eye closed, one eye half open, like, okay, yeah, why are you doing this? Why do you have this legislation? Why are you pushing this narrative? Why are you pushing this particular law, that particular law? Start looking in for the reasons. Start looking behind how they change the names of things like the Inflation Reduction Act and start looking at what they have in it. And then you have to ask yourself, how does this reduce inflation? See, most people don't investigate anything. They don't investigate anything. They want to go home and watch a football game. They want to go home, sit down, and watch some inane, stupid sitcom that's not even funny anymore, because you're not even allowed to have a sense of humor anymore, because everything that used to be funny is now considered offensive. Pay attention to who they demonize and who they elevate. Pay attention to what is acceptable now versus 2 years ago, versus 3 years ago, versus 4 years ago, versus 10 years ago, versus 30 years ago. Pay attention to these things and think and ask, and if you happen to have a clogged mind and don't believe in an omnipotent, omnipotent God, ask him to open your mind. Just ask him to take the blinders, even if you think it's a joke. Say it with jokingly. Just ask. Yeah, well, I don't believe in you, God, but if you're there, open my eyes. Boy, you might be surprised what happens. You might be surprised. So, I'll cut this short because I'm up at 16 minutes, and I don't expect anybody to believe anything I say, or really don't. My whole thing is I want people's wheels to turn a little more. I'm just like the rest of you who watch this, man. I'm just an average person. I get up every day. I brush my teeth twice a day. I wash my hair. I jump in the shower. I burp. I fart. I sit on a toilet. I'm like the rest of you, okay? I'm no different than anybody else. But I really, really want people's wheels to turn, because I meet a lot of people. Based on my job. I meet a lot of strangers on a continual basis. And one of the things I'm starting to learn is just most people go through life like this. Most people do. And I understand why. I get it. Everybody's got challenges personally and in their family and socially and at the job and all that stuff. I get it. But man, you got to get off the Kool-Aid somewhere. You got to put it this way. Kool-Aid's great when you're a kid. But somewhere along the line, you should read the package and say, what is this? I can't even pronounce this. Somewhere along the line, you're going to say, wow, this tastes great, but I don't even know what this stuff is. Maybe I shouldn't be drinking this stuff anymore. Maybe you shouldn't be drinking this stuff anymore. There's a saying from Chinese culture, the journey of 1,000 miles starts with a few steps. Take those few steps today and start broadening your mind and start to look at things with a different lens. And I'm going to leave you with this thought. Never believe a damn thing that comes out of the government's mouth. Don't believe them. Look in the opposite direction of where they're trying to point you to. And then try to educate yourself and change the way you think and perceive the world you live in. I hope somebody has wheels turning. That's all I can say. I just hope somebody watching this has some wheels that start to turn. So, all right, that's all. Till next time.